Hey guys, tonight, we are stepping into the kind of place where you would probably not survive more than a day. And honestly, you would not even make it through the front door without getting caught staring at the marble floors or tripping over your own sandals, because this is not just any Roman villa. This is one of those sprawling mansions where the walls are so polished and the hallways so silent that every little whisper bounces around like a guilty thought. And the funny thing is that the quieter it gets, the more you notice the secrets humming just beneath the surface. Like when you are in a library, and you know half the people there are pretending to read but are really spying on everyone else. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do. Here, drop a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is right now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together, where you find yourself barefoot on a cool mosaic floor. The tiles patterned with swirling fish that look as if they might swim away if you stare too long. And the first thing you feel is the chill of the stone against your toes. The second thing you feel is the heavy silence pressing down on you, because behind every column there could be someone waiting, or maybe no one at all, which is worse because the villa has that uncanny ability to make you feel as if you are constantly watched even when you are not. And historians still wonder whether Roman households with their open courtyards and echoing halls were designed less for beauty and more for surveillance, the way a senator could stroll through and pick up every half-finished conversation without anyone daring to stop him. But for now, you notice how the walls are lined with frescoes, bright reds and ochres, paintings of mythological scenes that seem harmless enough until you realize some of them are not just art, but coded references to the owner's desires, a sly nod here, a veiled symbol there. And while the widely accepted fact is that Roman villas often displayed the family's wealth and culture through these wall paintings, the lesser-known detail is that certain bedrooms had deliberately suggestive imagery painted not for beauty, but as signals, the kind of signals you would not quite understand unless you were part of the inner circle, which unfortunately for you, you are not. And so you move carefully, the soft sound of your steps echoing down corridors lined with clay amphorae that smell faintly of oil and wine. The scent drifting like a reminder that even the most dignified senator has amphorae stacked in his hall like empty soda cans after a party. And it makes you wonder how much of Rome's polished veneer was just that, a veneer, and how much was constant chaos swept into the corners where servants pretended not to see. And as you wander deeper into the villa, past a courtyard where a trickling fountain catches starlight, you feel the temperature shift, cool marble giving way to the warmth of torchlight further in. And with every step, the silence grows heavier until the air itself feels like a curtain of secrecy. You glance at the shadows and wonder if behind one of those carved doors lies a senator whispering in the dark, if behind another is a forbidden meeting. And though history leaves us with endless tales of Roman bedrooms, one of the greatest debates still lingers. Were these scandals exaggerated by later writers who loved drama? Or was life in these marble halls truly as tangled and theatrical as it sounds? Because when you look at these polished walls and hear the faint echoes of sandals on stone, it is impossible not to think that even silence here was carefully staged, that the walls themselves were built not just to impress but to conceal. And as you move toward the heart of the villa, that thought clings to you like the cool air, making you wonder whether the walls remember more than they will ever admit. The first thing that strikes you as you step deeper into the Roman villa is not the silence anymore, but the smell, thick and sweet, as if the very air has been steeped in perfumes, oils and smoke that has lingered for hours. And it is the kind of atmosphere that makes you feel like you have wandered into a giant scented candle that might suffocate you before it relaxes you. Because Romans loved their fragrances so much that they would mix oils with rose petals, cinnamon, or even saffron, dabbing it on their skin and splashing it on their hair until the scent clung like a second garment. And you quickly realize that this room is less about resting and more about staging. Because the lamps burning here are not just plain little oil lamps, but carved bronze and terracotta pieces, each one shaped like a tiny work of art, glowing with a soft golden light that paints shadows across the walls. And you probably think the room looks romantic, but it is also faintly dangerous, because one careless flick of a sleeve and the whole place could go up like a toga on parade. Which makes you wonder how many scandals ended not with whispered gossip, but with a poorly placed lamp, though the historians will never tell you that part of the story. And as you breathe in the heady air, you notice how the perfumes cling to everything. The drapes smell like jasmine, the cushions smell like myrrh, and even the marble floor seems to give off a faint aroma, as if the stone itself has been drinking in centuries of spilled oil. And while it is a widely accepted fact that Roman households placed great emphasis on perfumes as symbols of wealth and refinement, what fewer people know is that some Romans grew suspicious of constant perfume use, whispering that heavy scents were a sign of moral weakness, a cover-up for corruption, or even a trick to seduce too easily, which makes you laugh because here you are in a chamber where the air itself feels like an attempt to seduce you, though all it is really doing is making you sneeze. And perhaps that is the greatest scandal of all, that the most elegant rooms in Rome also doubled as the worst allergy traps. And as you rub at your nose, you catch sight of a silver tray on the low table, the surface scattered with tiny alabaster jars that once held precious oils. Can you imagine how many hands reached for them during a night? How many lovers borrowed the same jar, leaving their fingerprints and secrets behind? And you wonder if the jars ever told on anyone when a servant wiped them clean in the morning, because the servants always knew more than they admitted. And the thought lingers as the light flickers in the corner, drawing your eyes to a lamp, with a design so curious it makes you pause, its handle shaped like a coiling serpent, its flame darting like a tongue, and you cannot help but smirk at the obviousness of it all, because if there is one thing the Romans never did, it was subtle symbolism, and yet you cannot deny that the serpent lamp looks impressive, hissing faintly as if daring you to guess its meaning. And here is where the debate among historians becomes playful, because some argue these decorative lamps were simply artistic flourishes, while others insist that such objects doubled as coded markers for private behavior, little signals to those in the know about what might happen once the lamps were dimmed. And the truth, of course, is that we cannot be sure, because history does not hand us the gossip directly. It only leaves us the props and expects us to guess. And so, you sit for a moment on a low couch, cushions embroidered with golden thread, catching the faint lamplight, and you feel the weight of the air around you, heavier and heavier, as if it is pressing into your lungs, until you think you might drown in the scent of roses and smoke. But then, just as you are about to give in, a breeze drifts through from a hidden opening in the wall, a whisper of cool night air, sneaking into the chamber like a guilty lover. And it makes you wonder if that is how the Romans kept from suffocating, by building secret drafts into their walls to let in relief, or if that is just your imagination, because historians still argue about how well ventilated these villas really were, some insisting they were airy and pleasant, others suggesting that after hours of lamps burning and perfumes spilling, the rooms must have been overwhelming. And as the flame flickers again and your eyes trace the curve of smoke curling up toward the ceiling, you realize that this atmosphere is not just decoration, it is a performance, a carefully staged cloud of scent and light, designed to soften the mind, blur the senses, and set the stage for whatever whispers might follow. And while you cannot predict the whispers yet, you can feel them already forming, weaving through the smoke, as if the villa itself is taking a deep perfumed breath and preparing to tell you everything you were never supposed to know. You rise from the low couch, your skin still tingling with the weight of perfume and smoke. And as you take a slow step forward, you notice the shift of fabric in the air, the way a curtain stirs though there is no draft. And that is when you realize that you are no longer alone in this chamber of oil lamps and lingering scent, because the silken drapes that line the archways quiver with footsteps just beyond them. Footsteps that do not hurry but glide, measured and deliberate, as though the very act of walking has become a game of secrecy, and you feel your own pace quicken slightly, caught between the curiosity of wanting to see who moves behind those folds, and the caution of knowing that in this villa, seeing too much might be the quickest way to ensure you never leave again. And as your hand brushes against one of the drapes, you feel how absurdly soft it is, dyed in deep crimson and trimmed with golden thread, the kind of silk that would cost an entire year's wages for the average Roman laborer. And that is the widely known fact about Rome, that its elite were addicted to silks imported from China along the Silk Road, wearing them not only as garments, but using them as decoration, despite the Senate's occasional attempts to ban them as decadent and corrupting. And it is almost comical how every time Rome tried to outlaw silk, Romans only wanted more of it, draping it over couches, hanging it in doorways, even wrapping it around columns as if stone itself needed to feel sensual. But here is the quirky detail you might not have expected, that some Romans whispered silk was so scandalous because it was nearly transparent, meaning that wearing it in certain settings was practically the same as wearing nothing at all, which suddenly makes the drapes in front of you feel less like innocent decoration and more like playful warning signs. Shimmering barriers meant to tease as much as to conceal, and the thought lingers with a nervous laugh in your chest, because if these fabrics could talk, they would tell you stories you are not ready to hear. And perhaps that is why your eyes keep darting toward the shadows behind them, convinced that someone is watching, or worse, waiting, because even the faintest brush of movement feels amplified in this perfumed silence, and historians still argue about just how private Roman bedrooms really were, whether intimacy was truly hidden, or whether the very architecture was designed so that nothing was ever completely secret, because when you glance at those archways, you cannot shake the sense that someone is always half seen just beyond the veil. Their presence a reminder that this villa is more theater than sanctuary, and so you move slowly onward, weaving between drapes that sway like restless actors. And every time the silk brushes your arm, you imagine it has been brushed before by senators, courtesans, poets, and servants, all moving through the same choreography of concealment, and the continuity of it unsettles you, as if the villa is rehearsing its scandals again and again with new players, while you, for the moment, are merely the latest stand-in, peeking past the curtain as the story unfolds in its endless loop of quiet footsteps and rustling silk. The drapes behind you sway back into stillness as you step into the next chamber, and suddenly the thick perfume that clung to your nose is replaced by something richer, more overwhelming, because here the air is filled with the heavy scent of roasted meats, honeyed sauces, and spiced wine. And you realize with a faint grin that you have wandered into the part of the villa where feasts spill far past midnight, the kind of banquets that the Romans loved to boast about. And immediately you are hit with the absurdity of it all, because the couches arranged in a U shape around low tables are not just for sitting, but for reclining, meaning everyone is lying down in poses that look glamorous in frescoes, but in reality, probably left half the guests with back pain and indigestion. And yet they did it anyway, because it was fashionable to sprawl while slaves circled with trays of figs, oysters, or roasted dormice, which is a widely accepted fact about Roman dining, and a detail that still makes you wrinkle your nose, since the idea of nibbling on stuffed dormice while debating politics feels more like a dare than a delicacy. But the longer you look, the more you notice that food is only half the point of these endless gatherings, because here, under the glow of lamps and the shimmer of wine cups, the banquet is really just the curtain raiser for whispers that will later drift behind silk drapes. And it makes you smirk when you see one senator laughing far too loudly, his hand brushing a servant's wrist as if by accident. Because nothing in this room is accidental. Not the placement of couches, not the order of courses, and certainly not the deliberate way wine flows until tongues loosen. And here is the quirky truth. The Romans often flavored their wine with seawater or resin, giving it a taste that might shock you tonight, but they also diluted it with water, so that drinking was more about stamina than intoxication, meaning these banquets could go on for hours, sometimes even days, with the same guests weaving gossip through every course. And the open question historians still argue about is whether these gatherings were truly as wild and debauched as later writers claim, or if those tales were exaggerated for drama. Because when you look at the half-empty cups and the slow, deliberate movements of guests stretched on couches, you wonder if scandal here was less about chaos and more about choreography. Carefully timed glances, whispered words passed over trays of fruit, and subtle games of influence disguised as laughter. And as you stand in the corner of this glittering, noisy room, you notice how the servants never stop moving, pouring wine, replacing dishes, leaning close to listen when they think no one is watching. And you cannot help but wonder how much of Rome's history was carried not in the speeches of senators, but in the quiet reports of those who carried trays. And as you step past the tables, watching one guest lean just a little too close to another, you feel the continuity pulling you forward again. For this is not the climax of the story, but only the overture. A night of endless feasting that will eventually empty into darker, quieter rooms, where the true whispers of the villa wait for you. The laughter from the banquet lingers behind you as you slip into a narrower passage that curves away from the noisy glow of the dining chamber. And the shift feels immediate, because here the air is cooler, quieter, and the flickering lamplight seems steadier, almost cautious, as if even fire knows when to lower its voice. And it is in this hush that you come upon a chamber unmistakably reserved for power. A room that smells faintly of leather, ink, and the faint tang of metal coins, and sprawled across a low bed draped in silk, is a senator whose name you are not supposed to know, a man who wears authority the way others wear perfume, thick and impossible to ignore. And you realize that here, in this silk-shrouded space, ambition is not something that happens in the forum or the Senate House. It hums just as loudly in the bedroom, because when he reclines against his cushions sipping from a jeweled cup, his mind is not fixed on romance, but on alliances, promises, and whispered deals. And this is one of those moments when history feels almost too obvious, because the widely accepted fact is that Roman politics was fueled as much by personal relationships and private favors as it was by speeches in public. And while later historians wrote about laws and wars, the reality is that half those decisions may have been seeded in chambers just like this, where whispers carried more weight than decrees. And yet the quirky little truth that gives you pause is the way Romans often believed in omens tied to the bedroom itself. From dreams that foretold political victories to superstitions about which side of the bed was luckier to rise from. And as you watch this senator glance toward the drapes, as though waiting for someone who has not yet entered, you wonder how much of his destiny he credited to strategy and how much he secretly blamed on superstition. And there is the open question historians still debate. How much of Rome's great history was shaped not by rational decisions, but by private indulgences and fears whispered between silk sheets, because the lines blur so easily here that you cannot tell where politics ends and desire begins. And as you linger in the corner of this chamber, watching his ringed fingers tap against the rim of his cup in a rhythm that feels almost impatient, you sense that the villa is drawing you deeper still, that this senator's hidden desires are not isolated, but part of a web that stretches through every corridor and chamber, connecting banquets to bedrooms, servants to masters, whispers to destinies. And though the lamp burns steady, the air itself seems to pulse with the weight of secrets, urging you to keep moving. Because what waits in the next chamber is not the voice of the senator, but the silent eyes of those who see everything. You leave the senator behind in his silk-draped chamber, his jeweled cup gleaming faintly in the lamplight, as though it has absorbed every drop of his ambition, and you move down a narrower corridor where the stone walls feel less polished and the floor mosaics grow simpler, almost as if the villa itself is reminding you that while the masters recline in their luxury, another world moves silently just a few steps away, a world of eyes that see everything and mouths that rarely speak, because here behind the glimmer of Roman power live the servants, the cooks, the attendants, the scribes, and the slaves who carry the weight of secrets with the same steadiness they carry trays of wine. And you realize almost instantly that if you wish to know what really happens in these marble chambers, you will learn it not from senators or courtesans, but from the quiet shadows who pour the oil, trim the wicks, and collect the empty cups before dawn, because their eyes notice what others pretend to ignore, and their ears catch what others are too drunk or too distracted to conceal. You feel it even now, the faint shuffle of sandals along the corridor, the sudden stillness when you turn your head, the way a servant lowers his gaze respectfully while carrying a jug, though you can sense he already knows where you have been and who you have seen. And you cannot help but smile at the irony, because the most powerful people in Rome often believed themselves invisible behind closed doors, when in reality, they were always in the company of these quiet witnesses who could recall not only the words spoken, but the tone, the pauses, the trembling in the voice, and perhaps even the look in someone's eyes as promises were made and betrayed. The widely accepted fact, of course, is that Roman households were massive, sometimes filled with hundreds of slaves and freedmen, each one assigned to a specific task, from pouring water to managing finances, and their presence was constant, woven into the fabric of daily life so completely that most masters hardly thought about them at all. But here is the quirky detail that makes you chuckle. Some Romans became so paranoid about being overheard by their own attendants that they began training dogs or parrots to deliver messages in code, as if replacing human servants with animals would somehow guarantee loyalty, which might sound clever, until you imagine a parrot squawking out a secret at the worst possible moment, and you realize that perhaps the Romans were not as subtle as they like to believe. Yet the open question that lingers even among historians is this: how much influence did these servants truly wield? How many outcomes of Roman politics and passion were shaped not by the senators themselves, but by the people who tidied their chambers, overheard their schemes, and whispered those secrets to others who knew how to use them? Because there are tantalizing hints in letters and accounts that certain slaves became indispensable not for their labor, but for their information, their knowledge of who visited whom, who received what letter and who left whose chamber, long after the lamps were extinguished. As you drift further into this quieter part of the villa, you pass the small quarters where the servants rest, a stark contrast to the silk and gold of the main rooms, and yet even here you sense a kind of invisible luxury, because knowledge itself is a form of wealth, and every servant here carries within them a treasury of gossip, scandal, and truth, though most of it will never be written down. And perhaps that is the greatest frustration of wandering through a place like this, that you can feel the weight of all these unrecorded lives brushing past you, eyes flicking up for a moment before lowering again, hands moving steadily with pictures or scrolls, as if the very act of pretending not to notice is its own profession. You watch one servant pour oil into a lamp, his hand steady despite the faint tremor of voices drifting through the wall from the senator's chamber, and you marvel at the discipline of it, the ability to keep a neutral face while hearing words that could topple reputations or even shift political tides. And it makes you wonder if self-control was the greatest skill expected of them, not the carrying of trays or the folding of linens, but the mastery of silence in a world that depended on silence to survive. Another servant passes carrying a folded note tucked beneath a platter, and you notice how smoothly it is done, as if this is not the first time a message has been delivered in such a way, and you feel a ripple of amusement because it is clear that half the invisible labor of this villa is not just in cooking or cleaning, but in the management of secrets, the passing of coded glances, the slipping of letters into hands when no one else is watching. And you cannot help but wonder how many scandals were orchestrated not by the masters, but by the servants who learned to play their own quiet games within these walls. The villa hums differently here, less with perfume and laughter, more with footsteps and whispers, and you realize that this entire household runs not on the will of its master, but on the tireless movements of those who never receive the credit. And yet those very movements form the nervous system of the house, carrying messages, food, and information with equal precision. And you begin to see the entire structure of Roman society reflected in these corridors. The illusion of grandeur balanced precariously on the backs of people who were expected to remain unseen. You pause for a moment at a doorway where two young attendants stand, their arms folded politely, their eyes flicking just once toward you before they glance away. And you think to yourself that they have already measured you, placed you in their mental map of comings and goings, and filed you away as yet another piece of information. And it sends a chill down your spine to realize that you are no more immune to their watchfulness than the senator or his courtesan might be. That even you are now woven into the fabric of secrets that these eyes will carry into the next dawn. And here in this subtle tension lies the real heart of the villa, because while the drapes shimmer with mystery and the banquets echo with laughter, it is in these quieter corridors where the true history is written, silently, invisibly, and endlessly recycled in the minds of those who were never meant to speak, but who saw everything, and perhaps still see you now, as you walk further down the hall, leaving behind the hum of their watchful presence, moving toward the next set of shadows, where folded notes wait beneath cushions, carrying promises that are heavier than love. The corridor narrows as you move further away from the servant quarters, the faint shuffle of their sandals echoing behind you like a reminder that you are never truly alone in this villa, and soon you find yourself in a chamber that feels quieter, almost conspiratorial, as if it exists not for feasting or lounging, but for the quiet exchange of things that should never be spoken aloud, and your eyes are immediately drawn to the cushions scattered across low couches. Their embroidered surfaces creased in a way that suggests they have been lifted and pressed and rearranged far too often. And it does not take you long to notice why, because beneath the folds of one, peeking out ever so slightly, is the corner of a rolled parchment. And the moment you see it, you realize that this is the hidden nervous system of the villa. Not the footsteps of the servants, not the flicker of the lamps, but these secret messages that traveled invisibly through hands and rooms, slipping from one life to another like threads, weaving a web of scandal and intrigue. You reach out and touch the parchment, feeling the rough edge of papyrus beneath your fingers, and you imagine the weight of what it carries, words that may look like innocent poetry, but are in fact declarations of longing, promises of rendezvous, or worse, political deals that could topple reputations if ever read by the wrong eyes. And it strikes you as both absurd and inevitable that in a villa where everyone is pretending not to see, words are the most dangerous objects of all. The widely accepted fact is that Romans loved their written correspondence almost as much as their banquets, composing letters with wax tablets, papyrus scrolls, and ink that often carried as much flourish as the words themselves. And letters were not just private musings but public performances in miniature, crafted to be read aloud or passed along, shaping reputations as they traveled. But here is the quirky detail that makes you laugh under your breath. Many Romans wrote in shorthand, a kind of ancient speed writing, so that the servants delivering the letters would not always know what they carried. Yet the irony is that some servants learned the shorthand anyway, secretly reading and sometimes even copying the messages before passing them on, which makes you wonder if half the so-called private scandals of Rome were only private because the servants were polite enough to pretend they did not already know everything. And yet, there is an open question that still lingers in the minds of historians. How many of Rome's great political shifts began not in the Senate, but in these hidden exchanges, with one note slipped under a cushion, one scroll tucked into a sleeve, one wax tablet erased and rewritten before morning? Because the evidence is fragmented, the story is partial, and the truth is forever just out of reach, hidden in the gaps between what was written and what was destroyed. You tuck the parchment back beneath the cushion, your fingers brushing against embroidery that feels warm from the lingering heat of the lamp nearby, and you imagine the nervous hands that placed it there earlier, the rapid heartbeat of someone who knew that discovery would mean disgrace or worse. And suddenly you feel the room itself press in on you, heavy with the knowledge that you have stepped into a current that never stops moving, a current of letters and whispers that flow day and night, weaving through the villa like underground water, unseen but unstoppable. The cushions, the tables, even the folds of the drapes seem suddenly alive with possibility, each one hiding another message, another story, and as you sit on the edge of a couch, you can almost hear the faint crackle of parchment beneath you, the voices of those who wrote their names in ink, believing the walls would keep their secrets. And it is both comforting and terrifying to realize that paper remembers longer than people do, that these scrolls and scraps might outlast every whispered conversation, and yet reveal only fragments, leaving the rest to imagination. The air is thicker here, heavy not with perfume but with anticipation, as if every corner of the room is waiting for you to discover the next hidden letter, and you cannot help but feel amused at the clumsiness of it all, because for all their wealth and power, the Romans were still hiding notes under cushions like school children passing folded paper in a classroom. And perhaps that is the universal truth of humanity, that no matter how grand the empire, secrets are always scribbled on scraps and tucked away in places someone is bound to sit on later. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment, listening to the silence, and you imagine the hands that will come later tonight, slipping into this room, lifting the cushion just slightly, retrieving the message with the calm precision of someone who has done this many times before, and it makes you wonder whether secrecy is not just an accident here, but a ritual, as carefully rehearsed as the feasts and the ceremonies, because every hidden letter is part of a performance, each one a line in a play that only a few are meant to hear. And as you open your eyes again, the lamplight catches on the edge of another cushion, and you swear you see the faint curve of wax tablet tucked just out of sight. And though you resist the urge to reach for it this time, the thought stays with you, that somewhere in this villa right now another message is waiting, carrying words that might bind two lovers, or ignite a scandal that could ripple outward until it reaches the Senate itself. And perhaps it is that knowledge that constant hum of potential discovery, that gives the villa its pulse a steady rhythm of secrets passed in silence, moving beneath the surface of luxury like blood in unseen veins, urging you onward toward the sound of laughter. Drifting down the hall, a laugh polished sweet as honey, belonging to a courtesan who has learned to survive by knowing exactly when to let a secret slip and when to keep it hidden. You follow that trail of laughter like a thread, weaving your way past the walls that seem to thrum with the weight of hidden words until the corridor bends and you step into a chamber drenched in candlelight that glows soft against polished marble. And there she is, reclining with practiced ease upon a couch as though she has been waiting for you all along. Her robe draped in folds that look accidental, but are really the result of deliberate calculation, and her smile is sharper than any dagger, because it tells you that she has seen everything, heard everything, and survived it all by deciding exactly which words to let slip into the air and which ones to keep pressed like secrets beneath her tongue. And you immediately understand that courtesans in Rome were not just ornaments to be admired, but living vaults of gossip and leverage, and perhaps the most dangerous figures in any scandal, because they carried within them the power to ruin men who believed themselves untouchable. The widely accepted fact is that Roman courtesans often mingled with senators, poets, generals, and philosophers, moving through circles of influence that blurred the line between bedroom and politics, and they became repositories of information as valuable as any chest of coins. Yet here is the quirky detail. Some courtesans actually trained themselves in philosophy and rhetoric, mastering clever wordplay so they could hold their own in conversation with the very men who believed they were only there to provide beauty. And in doing so, they often trapped their patrons into saying things they would never have admitted to another senator, which turned a night of pleasure into a quiet act of espionage. And yet the open question that still lingers is whether the courtesans were willing agents of intrigue or simply survivors using the only leverage the empire permitted them. Because historians debate whether their voices were truly their own, or whether they were forever bent to the needs of others, who sought to use their knowledge for political gain. You sit near her, careful to keep your posture relaxed, though you sense immediately that she reads you like one of the wax tablets tucked beneath the cushions. You have already seen her eyes flicking to your hands, your shoulders, even the way your breath quickens as she leans closer. And you realize that this game is not about seduction in the usual sense, but about unmasking, stripping away your careful composure until you are speaking truths you did not mean to reveal. And she laughs softly, not cruelly, but with the weary amusement of someone who has already collected dozens of confessions before supper. The silk curtain sways as though moved by a breeze, though no window is open, and it adds to the feeling that this room itself conspires with her, wrapping you in a sense of intimacy that is both comforting and dangerous. And you think about how many Roman leaders might have sat in this very position, believing themselves in control, only to discover that their own words had betrayed them before they ever reached the Senate. The candlelight catches on her hair, on the curve of her bracelet, on the rim of the goblet she holds, and every detail seems choreographed to remind you that she is both part of the villa's beauty and its most potent weapon. And she tells you a story in a voice so smooth it feels like warm honey, about a general who returned from campaign not with gold or triumph, but with shame, because a single careless phrase he whispered in a moment like this had found its way into the wrong ears, reshaped by rumor until it destroyed his career. And you cannot help but laugh quietly at the irony that mighty battles were decided with swords and spears, while reputations could be destroyed with a single slip of the tongue in a candlelit room. The goblet passes into your hand, the wine sweet and heavy, and you sip it more slowly than usual, because every taste feels like part of her performance, another step in a dance you know you cannot win, but cannot resist following. You wonder whether she keeps a mental ledger of secrets, organized not by names, but by the expressions on the faces of the men who delivered them, and you feel the strange comfort of knowing that she is the only one in this villa who truly understands how fragile every reputation is, because she has watched men rise and fall with the swiftness of a shadow at sunset, and she knows that the empire itself is not held together by marble or armies, but by the delicate balance of who knows what and who pretends not to. And perhaps it is that knowledge that makes her dangerous, more dangerous even than the scrolls hidden under cushions. Because while parchment can be burned, Her memory cannot, and you realize that every laugh she releases into the air is layered. A signal to those who know her well that she has gathered another piece of the puzzle. Another weapon she can choose to use or keep sealed away until the perfect moment. The air feels thicker as you sit with her, and you wonder how many truths have been traded here disguised as flirtation, how many promises whispered in jest were carried like daggers into political rivalries. And the thought makes you shiver even though the room is warm. Because you see clearly now that the scandals of Rome did not happen only in bedrooms filled with passion, but in these liminal spaces, half political, half intimate, where the courtesans reigned as queens without crowns, reminding everyone who entered that the real empire was not just outside on the streets of Rome, but here in the silken folds of whispered conversations. She leans close, her perfume wrapping around you like a net. And though she says nothing, the silence itself feels loaded, as though she is daring you to fill it with something reckless. And you laugh softly, deciding instead to hold your tongue, which makes her smile widen in satisfaction, because she knows that silence is often the most telling confession of all. When you finally rise to leave, she reclines again with the ease of someone who has seen 1,000 visitors come and go, her smile suggesting she has already gleaned more from your presence than you intended to give. And as you step back into the hallway, the sound of her laughter follows you like a perfume of its own, lingering even after the door closes, reminding you that every step deeper into this villa draws you further into a web of power, secrets, and performances that blur the line between survival and betrayal. And as you walk onward, you cannot help but think that perhaps the courtesans held more influence over the shape of Roman history than the senators ever dared admit. The corridor beyond the courtesan's chamber feels cooler, as if the air itself has shifted, now that you carry her laughter with you like a charm sewn invisibly into your tunic, and the sound of your own footsteps echoes against the marble in a rhythm that seems to announce your every thought. Though perhaps it is not the marble that echoes, but your own imagination, sharpened by the awareness that every wall here hides more than it shows. Every shadow contains the possibility of listening ears. And the deeper you go, the more you sense that this villa is less a home and more a stage where each room hosts a different act of the same endless play. The next act presents itself in the form of tapestries, heavy fabric hung across the walls to soften the sound of voices woven with mythological scenes of gods and heroes that would impress any visitor. But when you look closer, you see that they do more than decorate. They muffle, they hide. They allow words to be spoken in tones that cannot be carried too far. And the thought strikes you that these embroidered myths are really just elaborate screens behind which far more human dramas unfold. You brush your fingers against the fabric, feeling the roughness of dyed threads against your skin, and imagine how often someone has leaned close to whisper behind it, protected not by divine imagery, but by wool and clever placement. And suddenly, you are not looking at a heroic battle scene, but at a curtain shielding secrets that have already been swallowed whole by history. The widely accepted fact is that wealthy Roman homes were filled with frescoes and textiles, designed not only to show wealth, but to insulate against noise, turning the villa into an acoustic puzzle where words could vanish into walls or carry too far depending on design. And in this way, architecture itself became a tool of discretion and display. The quirky detail, though, is that some tapestries were intentionally hung loose, so that a careful hand could slip behind them and press an ear to the cold wall, turning decoration into a surveillance device. And it makes you smile to imagine senators and poets alike reduced to eavesdroppers, crouched behind scenes of Hercules wrestling lions, straining to catch the faintest syllable of gossip that might ruin a rival. And of course, the open question historians still wrestle with is how much of Roman intrigue relied on deliberate leaks, rather than true discoveries, whether half the overheard whispers were actually planted, spoken in just the right place at just the right volume, meant to be accidentally captured by the ear, lurking behind the woven gods, because when truth and rumor are woven together tightly enough, they become indistinguishable. You pause in the hallway, the flicker of an oil lamp casting shifting light across the woven faces of Venus and Mars, and you wonder whether the Romans who commissioned these scenes were aware that their gods had been transformed into accomplices to mortal scandal, their divine struggles reinterpreted by those who leaned against them, whispering names and promises in shadows, trusting the gods to keep silent. There is something deliciously ironic in that thought, that the gods on the walls hear everything and say nothing, while the servants behind the scenes hear everything and say everything, and you laugh softly to yourself, earning a curious look from a statue of Apollo in the corner, his stone eyes catching the lamplight, like he too is in on the joke. Further down the corridor, you notice how the placement of couches and small tables encourages clusters of conversation. Not too far apart, not too close, the perfect distance for gossip to be shared, but not overheard unless someone deliberately drifts too near. And it dawns on you that every piece of furniture here, every drape and lamp, every carved stool, is part of a choreography of scandal, guiding bodies into positions where secrets can be exchanged while still maintaining the illusion of casual gathering. You sit for a moment on a low stool, testing the way your voice bounces softly off the tapestry behind you, and you imagine how many names have been spoken in this very spot, names that perhaps once carried danger, now dissolved into silence, and the thought is almost comforting, that even the juiciest scandals eventually fade until they become no more threatening than faded thread. And yet you cannot shake the image of someone years ago pulling back one of these tapestries, just enough to step behind it, holding their breath as two lovers whispered promises in the next room, or as a senator muttered a deal he would later deny, and it makes you smile because it reminds you that for all their grandeur, the Romans were not so different from children sneaking behind curtains at a party, giggling at what they were never meant to hear. You picture one servant tripping on the hem of a tapestry, another caught with their head tilted a little too obviously toward the wall, and you wonder how many scandals were not destroyed by betrayal or politics, but simply by clumsiness, by someone being caught in the act of overhearing what they should not. The air grows warmer as you move deeper, perhaps from the lamps burning lower, perhaps from the sense that you are walking into the lungs of the villa itself, a place where breath and words circulate more freely, where every laugh and sigh seems amplified by the woven walls. You trail your hand along one last tapestry, its scene of Diana and her hunt fading in the lamplight, and you imagine that every god here has seen enough of mortal foolishness to last an eternity, yet they continue to watch silent guardians of gossip that once shook the empire, but now lives only in embroidered silence. And it strikes you that the true scandal of Rome is not that people betrayed one another, but that they did it so artfully, weaving lies and truths together, until even time itself struggles to separate them. You step into the next chamber, with that thought still lingering in your mind, carrying with you the faint scent of wool and dye. And for a moment, you almost expect the gods on the tapestry to lean forward and whisper one final secret into your ear. But they remain still, their woven eyes unblinking, leaving you to wonder whether silence is their final gift or their cruelest trick. The chamber you enter now feels like the belly of the villa, a space where the air is dense with warmth, from braziers tucked neatly into alcoves, where the marble seems to hum with the vibration of so many footsteps, so many whispered exchanges, so many glances darting from face to face, as though every person here has arrived carrying a secret, and every person is pretending not to notice. The floor is laid in intricate mosaics, each tile set into patterns of vines and mythological figures, but you quickly realize that the real art here is not the stone beneath your sandals, but the choreography of people above it. Men and women gliding across the room in tunics and robes, adjusting their togas with casual flourishes that disguise nervous hands, the flick of an eye toward a rival, the soft tug of a smile at the edge of a mouth when someone pretends not to have overheard. You feel yourself pulled into the flow, swept along with the low hum of voices, layered like the constant rustle of leaves in a breeze, and for a moment you almost forget that you are merely visiting, because the intensity of the atmosphere convinces you that you too must be hiding something, that you too are one secret away from catastrophe or triumph. The widely accepted fact is that gossip was the true bloodstream of Roman society, carrying information faster and more efficiently than official decrees, and it was as common in villas as it was in marketplaces or baths, binding together senators and merchants, generals and slaves in a network of rumor that functioned as an unofficial empire within the empire. But here comes the quirky detail that makes you grin despite yourself. Some Roman hosts employed professional rumor spreaders, individuals whose entire purpose was to hover discreetly and release fragments of information into conversations like seeds scattered in a field, knowing they would grow into tangled vines of speculation within hours, and you cannot help but laugh at the thought of someone paid not to serve food or pour wine, but simply to say, "I heard he is not as wealthy as he pretends," before vanishing into another group. The open question, of course, is whether this gossip was ever truly random, or whether it was always orchestrated, because historians still debate how many so-called spontaneous scandals were in fact carefully engineered smears launched at just the right dinner, just the right gathering, to topple reputations under the weight of nothing more than a whisper. As you move through the chamber, you notice how the conversations swell and fade like waves on a shore, some laughter sharp enough to cut, some murmurs soft enough that you lean closer instinctively, and you begin to see that gossip here is not merely idle chatter, but a currency, traded with as much calculation as gold coins, each fragment of rumor carrying value depending on its rarity, its believability, and its potential to ruin or elevate. A senator with a flushed face leans too close to a young poet, muttering something that makes the poet's eyes widen before he quickly masks it with a laugh, while across the room a pair of matrons exchange glances, so sharp they could slice marble. Their lips pursed as though each one has just deposited another coin into the bank of secrets that will one day pay dividends. You find yourself amused at the absurdity of it all, because it becomes clear that everyone here is both banker and thief, both investor and beggar, each desperate to acquire just enough information to keep themselves safe, or better yet, to endanger someone else. You pause near a low table where bowls of figs and dates have been set out, and you imagine how many rumors have been birthed right here over shared fruit, the sticky sweetness clinging to fingers that point discreetly at targets across the room. And you smile at the thought that perhaps the most dangerous weapons in this villa are not the daggers hidden in sleeves, but the grapes pressed gently into someone's palm as they lean close to say, "Do you know what I heard?" And perhaps the true genius of Roman scandal is that it rarely required proof, because once a rumor began, it grew on its own, fed by fear, envy, and the relentless need for entertainment, until even the accused began to wonder whether it might be true after all. The air grows hotter the longer you remain, not because of the braziers, but because of the sheer energy of so many stories colliding, bouncing from mouth to mouth, reshaped each time until the original truth, if there ever was one, has been smothered beneath layers of embellishment. You think of the courtesan's laughter still lingering in your memory, and you realize that she too was part of this machine feeding gossip, carefully pruning it like a gardener tending vines, knowing exactly when to let a truth grow wild and when to trim it into silence. And it strikes you suddenly that gossip in Rome was not an accident, but an art practiced with as much dedication as sculpture or poetry, and the villa itself is a gallery of invisible masterpieces, each whispered phrase, another brushstroke in a painting that can only be seen by those willing to step close enough to hear. You find yourself smiling, half weary, half exhilarated, because the deeper you go, the more you realize that the villa is alive, its pulse quickened not by drums or music, but by the endless circulation of secrets, and every person you pass contributes a heartbeat, a sigh, a laugh, until you feel as though you are not walking through a building at all, but through the very bloodstream of scandal itself. And as you reach the far edge of the chamber, where the light is softer and the voices fade into a dull hum, you wonder how many lives were shaped not by decisions made in the Senate, but by the rumors born in rooms like this. How many careers destroyed, not by evidence, but by whispers. And you cannot help but laugh softly at the fragile absurdity of it all, because perhaps the entire empire was built on little more than the power of people leaning close to say, "Do not tell anyone." But the chamber fades behind you like the ebb of a tide, leaving in its wake the low murmur of gossip that still clings to your ears, and the next corridor seems narrower, longer, as though the villa itself is drawing you inward towards something more intimate, something quieter. Though the quiet here feels less like peace and more like the sharp inhale before a confession. The lamps burn lower along this passage, their olive oil nearly spent, the flames guttering in drafts that drift through unseen cracks. And the shadows flicker across painted walls, frescoes of gods caught in various states of embrace and quarrel scenes that blur the line between myth and human desire. It is fitting, you think, that you are entering the realm where desire is no longer whispered about in corners or exchanged through veiled hints, but acted upon directly, where the boundaries of secrecy are tested in the most vulnerable of settings. The bedroom. You step into a smaller chamber and are struck at once by its intimacy, compared to the grand rooms you have seen for here. The couches are lower, the fabrics softer, the lamps closer, and the air itself feels thicker, with the residue of countless nights, when words gave way to touch and touch gave way to consequences that rippled far beyond these four walls. The widely accepted fact is that Roman bedrooms or cubicula were often multifunctional spaces used not only for sleep, but for private conversations, strategic liaisons, and even the signing of important documents away from prying ears, so they were less sanctuaries of rest and more crucibles of decision-making disguised beneath sheets and cushions. The quirky detail that makes you pause is that some bedrooms contained wall paintings of explicitly erotic scenes, not hidden away, but displayed openly, a reminder that intimacy was not necessarily a private affair, but part of the cultural fabric woven into the architecture itself, as if to say, this too is Rome. And yet, the open question that lingers is how much of what happened in these bedrooms was truly voluntary. How much was performance for power? How much was survival masquerading as seduction? Because while fragments of poetry and graffiti survive to suggest passion, the silences of history leave us guessing at the blurred line between choice and coercion. You cross the room slowly, your sandals whispering against the floor as you take in the details. The faint scent of perfume lingering on the linens, the impression of bodies pressed into cushions now cooled by time, the soft hum of the villa just beyond the walls, reminding you that no bedroom here is truly isolated. That even in the most intimate of settings, the possibility of discovery hovers like a breath at the door. You sit briefly on the edge of the couch, the fabric yielding beneath you, and you imagine the figures who have sat here before, senators and poets, matrons and slaves, each of them entering with the same mix of anticipation and fear, knowing that what began in whispers might end in ruin if ever revealed. You laugh softly, though it feels almost sacrilegious in this charged space, because you realize that scandal here was less about what was done and more about who found out, that the same act performed by one couple might be dismissed as play, while by another it could topple a family, a career, even a seat in the Senate. The air is close heavy with the kind of silence that begs to be broken, and you find yourself running your hand along the carved edge of the couch, tracing the grooves worn by restless fingers long before yours, and you wonder how many confessions were spoken into these sheets, how many promises sealed with a touch that was supposed to be private, but inevitably seeped outward through servants, eyes and ears, through the sudden slips of courtesans, through the careless words of lovers who forgot that Rome was a city where nothing ever stayed hidden for long. You picture a general lying here, armor set aside in favor of vulnerability, whispering into the dark about fears he would never admit in daylight, or a senator pressing against a forbidden partner, the weight of his toga bunched uselessly at his side, knowing that one wrong word carried out of this room would unravel him faster than any enemy in the forum. And then your thoughts turn to the frescoes, their painted figures forever frozen in poses of pleasure and power. Their gazes turn toward you as if to remind you that what you see here is not shameful, but timeless, not aberration but ritual, repeated across generations. And it strikes you that perhaps the Romans painted these walls not simply for decoration, but as a kind of justification, a visual echo of myth that made human indulgence feel sanctioned by gods. Yet even as you think this, you remember the courtesan's laughter and the gossip chamber's hum, and you realize that no amount of divine imagery could protect mortals from the weight of rumor, that even here, where passion was meant to be private, the true danger was not the act itself, but the story that would be told afterward. The room presses in on you, the shadows deepening, as one lamp sputters its wick, drowning in spent oil, and you find yourself exhaling slowly, as though releasing the breath of countless Romans who once lay here holding their own air tight as they waited for footsteps to pass, for doors to stay closed, for secrets to remain secrets. You feel almost as though you are intruding, yet you cannot resist the pull of the place, because there is something profoundly human about these walls, Something that speaks not of emperors and armies, but of people simply trying to balance desire and survival in a world where privacy was always an illusion. You smile at the absurdity of it, because it is oddly comforting to know that for all their grandeur, the Romans too struggled with tangled sheets, awkward confessions, and the eternal gamble of trust in the dark. And as you rise again, stepping toward the doorway, you glance once more at the frescoes, at the painted gods entwined in their endless embrace, and you wonder whether they laugh at mortals for thinking themselves scandalous, whether they pity the humans who believed their bedrooms could contain their secrets, or whether they too are complicit, lending their immortal silence to a game that has played out countless times and will continue to play out as long as people lean close in the dark and whisper promises they may never keep. You step out of the bedroom chamber with its painted gods and perfumed sheets and find yourself moving down a corridor that slopes gently toward the heart of the villa, the sound of your own steps swallowed by thick walls until you hear something else, a muted thrum like the distant pulse of water, steady and low, guiding you toward a space that feels less like secrecy behind doors and more like secrecy dissolved into steam. You follow the sound, and soon a wave of warm air rushes to meet you, thick with moisture, scented faintly with oils. And when you push through the curtain of fabric that separates hallway from bath, you are enveloped by the humid embrace of the Roman thermae within the villa private, yet connected to the same culture of bathing that dominated public life outside these walls. The chamber is lit by flickering lamps set in bronze holders, their light blurred by steam that coils lazily across the mosaic floors, twisting around pillars, softening the edges of statues that watch silently as figures drift through the haze, robes and towels clinging to damp skin, voices low, laughter subdued as if the very air insists on discretion. You realize immediately that here too, scandal has a home, because the steam does more than cleanse bodies. It blurs outlines, muffles voices, and makes confessions feel safer, though they are never truly safe. The widely accepted fact is that bathing was an essential ritual in Roman culture, both public and private, serving not only hygienic needs, but also social and political functions, with wealthy households like this one constructing their own small-scale thermae to impress guests and secure privacy. The quirky detail that amuses you as you stand in the mist is that Romans sometimes added herbs or even crushed flowers directly into the heated pools, both for fragrance and for supposed medicinal benefits, so that the water became as much a potion as a bath. And you imagine someone lounging here with rose-scented steam rising around them while plotting the downfall of a rival senator. The open question that lingers, though, is how much of what happened in baths, both public and private, was intentionally engineered. Whether deals and betrayals were planned here because the conditions made them ideal, or whether the vulnerability of naked bodies and softened voices simply created an environment where truths slipped out unguarded, where power itself was negotiated through a combination of sweat and steam. You walk deeper into the bath chamber, the floor warm beneath your sandals, the sound of dripping water echoing in the high ceiling, and the scene around you feels both intimate and theatrical. Men reclining against the pool, edge with goblets balanced precariously near their hands, women wrapped in damp cloths exchanging murmured jokes, servants moving like shadows to replenish oil lamps or offer towels, their eyes carefully averted, though you suspect they hear everything. You lower yourself onto a marble bench slick with condensation, the coolness of the stone a surprising contrast to the heavy air, and you find yourself exhaling slowly, your breath mixing with the vapor, disappearing almost instantly, as if the bath itself is swallowing it whole. It strikes you that this is the essence of the place. Words spoken here do not carry far, they vanish into mist, half-remembered, half-dreamt, and yet they linger just long enough to plant suspicion, just long enough to weave into the tapestry of rumor that circulates through the villa when the bathers emerge refreshed, carrying drops of scandal along with drops of water. The steam thickens as you sit, shapes dissolving into silhouettes, and you cannot help but smile at the absurdity of it, that senators who thunder in the forum, generals who command legions, matrons who rule households, all dissolve here into vague outlines, their power temporarily softened by sweat and steam. And yet perhaps that is why scandal thrives in baths, because everyone appears equal when their bodies glisten alike, and words carry a dangerous intimacy when spoken by voices you can hear but not clearly see. You picture two lovers leaning closer beneath the haze, convinced they are invisible, only for a servant to catch their laughter and later repeat it elsewhere, turning a stolen moment into fuel for gossip. You imagine a senator confessing frustration to a supposed friend, unaware that his words are already being reshaped into daggers to be hurled back at him later, and you laugh quietly because it feels like the steam itself is a trickster erasing clarity while amplifying suspicion. You dip your fingers into the pool, the water hot enough to sting before it soothes, and you feel how it clings, how it leaves traces on your skin, and you think about how scandal is much the same, slippery, lingering, impossible to contain fully once it has touched you. The room grows louder for a moment, as a burst of laughter rises from one corner, though you cannot see its source, and you imagine a group of courtiers exchanging a joke at someone else's expense, a story rehearsed in whispers, now performed in steam, and you wonder whether laughter is the truest currency of gossip, whether what begins as a chuckle in a bath ends as a decree in the Senate. And perhaps that is why the Romans loved their baths so deeply, because they provided not just relief from heat and dust, but also a perfect excuse for intimacy, a perfect cover for exchanges that would have been far too dangerous in a brightly lit atrium or a guarded triclinium. The steam curls against your face, dampening your hair. And as you lean back against the bench, you feel your body growing heavy, your eyelids drooping in rhythm with the flickering lamps. And for a moment, it almost feels as though you could drift into sleep here, carried off by warmth and quiet. But you remind yourself with a soft laugh that nothing here is ever truly restful. That even in this haze there are eyes watching, ears listening, stories forming like droplets on stone. You rise slowly, the water dripping from your fingers, and as you walk back toward the curtain of fabric, you feel the steam cling to your clothes, carrying the scent of oils and herbs. With you, a reminder that you have stepped through yet another layer of the villa's labyrinth of secrets. And as you pass through into the cooler corridor beyond, you glance back once, half expecting the mist to part and reveal some hidden figure whispering your name. But it only swirls silently, keeping its secrets as it always has, as it always will. The air cools around you as you leave the damp embrace of the bath chamber, your skin still carrying a faint sheen of moisture, and the herbal scent of oils clinging like a soft reminder that the villa is less about cleanliness and more about transformation, about slipping from one mask into another. The corridor ahead feels different from the others you have walked. Its walls are lined not with murals or busts of stern ancestors, but with subtle niches where curtains half hide alcoves, and the sound here is not of dripping water or footsteps, but of softer notes, faint strings plucked somewhere deeper within, the melody carrying with it the suggestion of performance, of staged beauty that was never meant to be fully private. You follow that music, moving steadily, until the corridor spills into a wide chamber, not quite a dining hall and not quite a bedroom, but something in between, designed for one purpose: to entertain. The floor is a patterned mosaic that glitters in lamplight, depicting swirling shapes rather than gods or battles, perhaps chosen deliberately to reflect motion and pleasure, and upon low couches draped with fabrics sit courtesans whose role is not to be hidden, but to be admired, to turn the villa itself into a theater of desire, where beauty and wit are displayed as tools, just as sharp as any sword carried into war. It is widely accepted that courtesans held a peculiar position in Roman society, often dismissed publicly but secretly celebrated, weaving themselves into the political and social fabric in ways that men in power both resented and relied upon, because beauty could open doors that rhetoric alone could not. The quirky detail that makes you smirk is that some of these women were known to paint not only their faces, but even their veins with delicate blue lines to enhance the illusion of pale, translucent skin. A subtle artistry that turned the body itself into a crafted performance, and you marvel at the effort expended simply to become more dream than flesh. The open question that lingers here, though, is whether these women were ever truly in control of their own power, or whether they remained at the mercy of those who sought to use them. For historians still debate whether their influence was genuine autonomy or a fragile illusion, tolerated only as long as it entertained those in command. The music swells faintly, a flute joining the strings, and you see how the courtesans respond. One reclines gracefully, her smile a calculated gesture, her eyes glancing toward the man on the opposite couch, with just enough warmth to suggest interest without commitment, while another plays with a golden necklace, letting it catch the lamplight as though daring anyone watching to imagine what secrets its clasp might conceal. You settle quietly against a marble pillar, half in shadow observing, and the scene unfolds like a carefully written play. Men with wine in their hands lean forward, captivated, laughing at lines that are not particularly witty, while women shift just enough to maintain a rhythm of allure, their movements subtle, controlled every gesture designed to maintain the balance between approach and retreat. It is here that you realize the true scandal of courtesans is not their presence but their performance, for they transform desire into a staged ritual. And in doing so, they expose the vulnerability of the powerful, who in public command armies but in private sit helpless before a tilted smile or a whispered promise. You breathe in the mingled scents of wine, perfume, and smoke, and your thoughts drift briefly to the irony of it all. Rome's grand history is filled with battles, decrees, and monuments, yet here you are in a chamber where the most decisive struggles involve glances across lamplight, where alliances are hinted at, not with treaties but with the tilt of a shoulder. You imagine, with a soft laugh, a general confessing strategy to a courtesan as though she were a co-commander, only to wake the next morning and discover his secrets already traded like currency through the corridors of the villa. And perhaps that is the genius of these women, that they learn to survive not by brute force but by turning the very art of survival into a performance, a balancing act between danger and delight. The music fades into a softer rhythm, the lamps flicker, and you notice that one of the courtesans looks not at her guests but at you, her gaze steady, amused, as if she sees through your silent observation, as if she knows you are not just another shadow in the room, but someone moving through the villa like a ghost collecting stories. You wonder whether she will remember you later, whether she will whisper about the stranger who lingered in the corner, or whether you are already being woven into her performance, another silent witness to be used when the time is right. The room feels suddenly tighter, the air denser, as though the weight of eyes and glances could press against your skin, and you realize that this chamber of courtesans is less about pleasure and more about power disguised in silk, that every laugh and every sigh is another thread in a net that captures secrets too easily spilled by those who believe they are immune to manipulation. And so you step back, letting the music and the voices blur behind you, retreating into the corridor once again, carrying with you not the warmth of beauty, but the knowledge that desire itself can be weaponized. That scandal thrives not only in whispered shadows, but also in staged performances, where everyone plays their part and no one admits the script. Ahead of you, the villa waits the next chamber, already humming faintly with voices, and you feel the momentum of the story pulling you deeper still, as if the walls themselves are eager to show you what lies behind their next curtain of secrets. The faint echo of flutes and laughter still trails after you as you leave the courtesan's chamber, but soon the air shifts again, growing cooler, drier, almost solemn, as though the villa itself is guiding you into a space where performance falls away and masks begin to slip. You walk along a corridor where the lamps burn lower, their light subdued, the floor colder beneath your sandals, and you feel as though you are stepping not just deeper into the house, but deeper into the minds of those who inhabit it. Ahead, the faintest murmurs grow louder, and when you reach the end of the hall, you come to a narrow door, half open, spilling a ribbon of lamplight onto the polished floor. You push it gently, and the room inside reveals itself as a place not of feasts or baths or staged beauty, but of plotting, a chamber reserved for whispered schemes, for the kind of conversations too dangerous to speak openly in the atrium or the Senate. The walls are painted with quiet landscapes rather than gods, as though nature itself is meant to mask the human nature inside. And around a low table sit several figures hunched forward, their cups of wine ignored, their words low and deliberate, weaving threads of scandal that may yet shape futures beyond this villa. The widely accepted fact about Roman elite households is that private councils such as this were common, for politics in Rome was rarely decided by public speeches alone, but rather by carefully arranged agreements whispered in villas like this one, far from the ears of rivals and the scrutiny of the forum. The quirky little detail, however, is that Romans often kept small wax tablets at hand during these secret gatherings, not for recording the official decisions of state, but for jotting notes, calculations, or even sketches, an odd image that amuses you to think of conspirators in the glow of lamplight, doodling tiny caricatures of their enemies in the margins while plotting their ruin. Yet the open question remains one that historians still argue. How much of Rome's great history was truly the product of deliberate conspiracy, and how much was the unpredictable result of gossip, misheard alliances, misunderstood, or secrets exposed at the wrong time? You linger in the doorway unnoticed, as one man leans forward, his voice taut with urgency, describing the senator you saw earlier in the silk-draped chamber, suggesting that his appetite for alliances is becoming dangerous, his indulgences giving too much power to those who share his bed. Another nods grimly, muttering that scandal travels faster than soldiers, that even whispers from servants or courtesans can erode a reputation before a rival ever raises a sword. You smile softly at the truth of it. Rome, which prided itself on its legions and its laws, may well have been undone as often by bedroom secrets as by battlefield losses. The wine remains untouched, the air thick with strategy, and you realize that this chamber is both quieter and far more perilous than the courtesan's stage, because here the performances are not meant to entertain, but to survive. You notice how the lamp flames tremble as one of the conspirators scratches on his wax tablet, his stylus leaving faint grooves, his lips twisting in thought, and you wonder whether he is recording strategy or simply buying time pretending to write as his mind works furiously. The shadows stretch long across the table, their faces half lit, half obscured, and you think about how this must have been the true texture of Roman power, not marble speeches or grand statues, but the uneasy dance of half-seen expressions in lamp-lit rooms where every word carries the weight of both promise and betrayal. You almost laugh imagining a modern comparison. It is like watching world leaders gathered, not around polished tables with microphones, but huddled on someone's back porch, scribbling on napkins, worried about who might be listening through the bushes. The humor of it takes the edge off, but only slightly, because the tension in the room is palpable, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. You shift slightly, your sandal brushing the floor, and one of the figures glances toward the door. For a moment you fear you have been seen, that your ghost-like wandering through this villa of scandals has finally been noticed. But his gaze moves past, returning to the table, as though even if he had glimpsed you, he decided you were just another shadow among many. Still, the moment sharpens your awareness. This villa is alive with more than just indulgence. It is alive with paranoia, with the knowledge that any secret can become a weapon, and that no chamber, however secluded, is ever truly safe. You step back careful, letting the curtain of shadows reclaim you, and the murmurs of conspiracy blur into a hum as the door closes softly behind you. The corridor beyond feels heavier now, as though the villa itself knows you have walked through the core of its hidden heart, where scandal ceases to be entertainment and becomes survival. You pause, taking a slow breath, and you feel the threads of everything you have witnessed so far. The senator in silk, the servants with sharp ears, the courtesans with painted veins, the steam-filled baths, the whispered jokes at the banquet, all converging, all feeding into the plotting you just left behind, as though the entire villa is a machine designed to generate secrets and feed them into the mouths of men who believe they can control them. But even you can sense the truth. No one here is truly in control, because secrets have a life of their own, and once spoken, they travel farther than anyone intends. And so you keep walking, deeper into the villa's belly, your footsteps echoing faintly, guided now not by laughter or music, but by something quieter, the promise of even more hidden rooms, of even more scandal carefully stored away. You wonder where the villa will take you next, what chamber will unfold before you. And as the corridor bends and the lamplight flickers, you realize that this journey has stopped being a simple exploration of space and has become a descent into the anatomy of Rome itself. Each room another organ in the body of a city that thrived on whispers as much as it did on stone. The corridor narrows as you press onward, the flickering lamplight leaving more darkness than illumination, until it feels as though you are walking through the very veins of the villa, past walls that have absorbed centuries of whispers, past shadows that seem too patient to be ordinary. The air is still, carrying only the faintest smell of smoke and oil, and then you notice something different. A stair curling downward, carved into stone, its edges worn by countless steps that were never meant for public feet. You descend slowly, each footfall hollow, and at the bottom you find yourself in a chamber that feels both hidden and deliberate. A sanctum of secrecy, where the villa's most private truths converge. It is not decorated with mosaics of gods or landscapes, for no illusions are needed here. Instead, the walls are bare, the stone cool and unadorned, as if to remind anyone who enters that pretense has no place when the stakes are this high. A single oil lamp rests on a ledge, its flame steady, casting long shadows that crisscross like the very web of gossip you have been tracing through every room of this place. In the center of the chamber stands a table, upon which lie wax tablets, scattered scrolls, and a bronze chest that looks heavy enough to swallow secrets whole. You pause in the doorway, sensing the gravity of this space, and you realize that what you are witnessing is not just another indulgence or another flirtation, but the archive of Scandal itself, the villa's true treasure hidden not in gold or jewels but in information, preserved carefully, waiting to be used. The widely accepted fact is that Romans, particularly those in positions of power, kept careful records of debts, agreements, and promises, and it is not unlikely that some households also maintained private accounts of favors, betrayals, and whispered confessions, a kind of insurance against the unpredictability of alliances. The quirky detail, though, is that wax tablets could be smoothed and reused, their inscriptions erased by fire and time, and yet some still carried faint grooves from older writings, ghostly lines visible if you tilted them just right in the lamplight. You imagine someone down here running a finger across the surface, tracing secrets that were supposedly destroyed but still lingered, like the echo of a voice that refused to be silenced. And the open question remains one that historians argue endlessly. How much of what we know or think we know about Roman scandals is truth preserved, and how much has been reshaped, misremembered, or erased, deliberately lost to wax and smoke, long before it reached parchment? You walk slowly toward the table, your eyes adjusting to the shadows, and you notice a tablet left open, its writing sharp, fresh, the stylus still lying beside it. The words are not names you recognize, but they describe meetings, gifts exchanged, obligations owed, details that feel intimate enough to ruin reputations if revealed. You wonder whether this chamber belongs to a master of the house, or perhaps to a servant clever enough to collect and preserve everything overheard, turning information into the most dangerous currency of all. The bronze chest hums in your imagination. What might be inside? More tablets? A cache of letters written by trembling hands, confessions scribbled and sealed, never meant to be seen again. You resist the urge to open it, for the truth is heavier than bronze, and even as a ghost-like visitor you feel its weight pressing against your chest. You lean against the wall, letting your eyes trace the play of shadows, and you think about the journey that has brought you here. The banquet filled with laughter and spiced wine, the senator in silk, the servants with watchful eyes, the courtesans painting beauty into illusion, the humid baths where secrets dissolved into steam, the chamber of conspirators bent over their tablets, all of it leading here, to the archive where whispers are turned into weapons, where the private moments you have witnessed are catalogued and preserved. And it strikes you that this is Rome itself, distilled, a city built not only on stone and law, but on memory, on the careful preservation of what people hoped would remain hidden. You smile softly at the irony that the eternal city was as eternal in its scandals as in its monuments. The lamp sputters slightly, its flame bending, and for a moment the shadows seem to shift, moving not with the rhythm of fire, but with something slower, more deliberate. You glance toward the corner of the chamber, and though no figure emerges, you cannot shake the sense that someone, or something, guards this place, that the villa itself resists your intrusion. You breathe deeply, steadying yourself, and you realize it is time to leave. Time to return from this labyrinth of secrets before the walls close around you entirely. You move back toward the stair, your steps soft, carrying with you the lingering weight of everything you have seen, everything you have felt. And as you ascend the winding stone, you sense that the villa exhales behind you. sealing its chamber of secrets once more. When you reach the corridor above, the air feels lighter, freer, though you know you will never shake the memory of that final room. The bronze chest still waiting, the tablet still whispering faintly in the silence. You walk toward the faint glow of an opening ahead, where night air drifts in from the villa's garden, cool and fragrant, carrying with it the sound of distant crickets. You step outside at last, beneath a Roman sky scattered with stars, and you let yourself breathe, the cool night wrapping around you like a cloak. The villa stands behind you, silent now, its scandals folded back into walls and rooms, its stories waiting for the next wanderer to uncover. You smile faintly because you know the truth. No matter how carefully hidden, no matter how artfully disguised, every villa, every city, every person carries its own archive of secrets, and some part of you will always wonder, what lies behind the next door, what whispers wait in the next chamber, what scandals will one day rise again to the surface. The night air is soft, now cooler than the villa's heavy chambers, and you feel yourself easing away from the weight of secrets, away from the sting of spiced wine, and the shimmer of silk carried instead by the rhythm of your own breathing, slow and steady. You step further into the garden, where olive trees sway gently in the dark, their branches tracing shapes against a sky that has witnessed more than you ever will, and you let your shoulders sink, your body loosening with each exhale. The faint sound of crickets folds into the silence, a quiet chorus that does not ask for your attention. It simply holds it, like a hand guiding you softly forward. Every stone path feels less real with each step, until it seems you are walking not through a Roman villa, but through a dream shaped by memory and imagination. One that does not demand anything of you now except to let go. You pause beside a fountain, its trickle of water catching starlight, and you realize how soothing the repetition is. Drop after drop, unhurried, unconcerned with anything but falling, and you let your mind fall the same way, gently, slowly, as if lowered into rest by invisible hands. The scandals you have witnessed blur like steam from the baths, dissolving into the night air, and all that remains is a soft calm, a steady rhythm, a sense of safety that deepens as you breathe. Your eyes grow heavier, your thoughts softer, and you allow yourself to drift, not resisting, just letting sleep rise like mist around you, until even the villa fades, until even the garden fades, and there is only stillness. So take one more breath, deep and slow. Let it out fully and let yourself sink into the comfort waiting beneath you. You have walked through shadows and whispers. You have traced secrets that were never yours to keep, and now you can release them all, for the night holds them in your place. The stars are steady, the air is kind, and sleep is here, ready to gather you in. Sweet dreams.